Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? Happy Thursday with the weekend right around the corner and week 3 of the college football season on tap. Virginia Tech heads to the Tidewater to take on Old Dominion in Norfolk on Saturday evening. It's episode 374 of the Tech Sideline podcast. We're talking all about it right now. And we're coming at you recording on a Thursday, September 12th, 2024, from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content, and for Virginia Tech students, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. We also want to take this opportunity to tell you all about our new online poster store. Tech Sideline is offering great wall hangings created from our incredible in-house photography. We've got action shots of the players like Stephen Gosnell's catch against Marshall last week, pageantry shots of the band and skipper, and we're adding more posters on a regular basis. Search the web for Tech Sideline posters or check out the link in the YouTube description and visit the store. Come back often because we're going to continue to put up new stuff on there. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, back from the timeout corner and his one episode stint off, Chris Coleman returns. The obnoxious know-it-all, as the comment sections have dubbed him, and I think we're going to continue to ring that bell because he knows his stuff. He's our lead analyst and columnist, of course. Across the way, Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer, and then in the fourth chair, our founder and general manager, Mr. Will Stewart. Nick Brown, the mustache man, producing the show, pushing the buttons behind the scenes. And guys, football week 3. It's always fun to get in here and talk about the upcoming opposition. But first, I want to take things back to the press conference and talk a little bit with Andy here. You talked with Coach. You talked specifically about this Old Dominion series as a whole. And it's kind of generated some catastrophic results that we know of. In 2018, 2022, Tech lost on the road in Norfolk. But despite whatever rumors have kind of swirled around this series, it's extended right now through 2031. And these games, as of right now, will be played. What did Coach have to say about that?
Well, he said about what you'd expect him to say. I mean, he's not the one in charge of making these series. This series was in place before he got here. I think if he spoke freely about his real feelings about it, he probably doesn't like it more for the fact that he has to go up against his friend and former colleague Ricky Ronnie every season than the actual series itself. But he said it, sort of made the statement that was the lead quote in the story. It's like, we need to have a football team that goes down there and is capable of winning. More or less. I don't have the exact quote in front of me here, but we wouldn't be asking these questions every year about the ODU series. Like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? If they haven't lost down there every time that they've traveled down there. So, if Virginia Tech can just go down there, handle business as a 14-point favorite, you're probably not getting this question the next time around. Plus, on top of that, the next 2 games in the series are in Blacksburg. So, Virginia Tech's thinking about maybe trying to get out of this or maybe cutting it short by a couple of years or something like that. They're not going to do it for the next 2 years because the next 2 years are home games. So if anything's going to happen with this, I would expect it down the line. But right now, it doesn't seem like there is.
Chris, what makes this series kind of unique? Because, one, Virginia Tech, in a way, has to pay Old Dominion when they come to Blacksburg. But also, this is more of a 1-for-1 setup. You don't typically get that. Usually you get maybe a 2-for-1 or 3-for-1 where they have to come here more than you have to go there, and that's not necessarily the case here.
Yeah, it's seen as a cost-saving measure. Notre Dame paid NIU $1.5 million to come to South Bend and beat them this past weekend, right? So these bye games are getting, the price of them is getting driven up by the big teams, right? They want the home games, so they're willing to pay more for them. So Virginia Tech either has to match them or come up with creative scheduling
Quick note: Clemson paid Appalachian State, I think it was $1.25 million to come in.
Right.
Some are like $2 million.
Yeah,
at this point. I mean, that eats into the bottom line on what you're making from a home game.
It really does. So if it was for me, like, I'm actually okay with the ODU series. I don't like the Liberty series. I don't see the reason to do both of them. And if I had to pick one, I would pick the ODU series because there's so many Virginia Tech fans in that part of the state that don't come to Blacksburg very often for games, and that now they get a chance to see Virginia Tech play in person, once every 2 years or thereabouts. So I think the Liberty series doesn't do anything. If you can go to a Virginia Tech Liberty game, in Lynchburg, you're going to Blacksburg anyway. But there are people out in the 757. I'm here. I've got a few texts from them. Hey, you coming to the game? I'm going to the game this weekend. They never come to the game in Blacksburg because it's so far away.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity for the fans in another part of the state to see the team play on a fairly regular basis. And let's face it, if Virginia Tech performs the way they're capable of performing, they shouldn't have any trouble winning the football game. There's no reason to, if we whined about it, playing every team that beat us over the last 10 years, then Tech would be playing a one-game schedule every year, UVA, right? So, yeah, spare me the tears from that. Go in there and win the game.
Sure.
I think the big issue that a lot of fans have with it, and the football heavy ones be like, oh, they should never go and play in a 40,000 seat stadium or even less. I forget what it is. And it's not 40. It's much less than that.
It's right there on your roster.
21,944.
That's what I meant.
That's smaller than some basketball arenas in the ACC.
The indignity of going down there as a Power 4 school and doing that. It's like, okay, only a certain number of people are really complaining about that level of it, but it's every single year this matchup takes place. It's like, if you're going to do that, it's got to be like a peer school or a conference school, some school that's on your level from a level playing field in terms of being in the Power 4 and drawing that kind of interest. Like Virginia should be a yearly game. Miami, I wish it was a yearly game. It should be a yearly game. If the ACC could schedule it that way, it won't. Do you need that with a group of 5 team? I feel like you can get in and out of this matchup and do it twice or maybe do it 4 times, then kind of vary it up. Do some games with Liberty, maybe. Do some games with James Madison. Schedule with Appalachian State or something like that. Just variety, I think, would make this schedule more interesting than, all right, it's ODU week again. It's like, you've been there, you've done that, you've gone down to that stadium, they've come here. Like, just move on to a different thing. And, variety is the spice of life. So, vary it up a little bit.
How about West Virginia?
I would love to do that.
You talked about Power 4. You're trying to fill out the schedule, and that's part of the challenge is with these smaller teams. I think if you did a home and home with some teams that are, maybe in border states but aren't necessarily, Marshall. That was a good one, home and home like that. Yeah. But if you played Marshall every single year,
you'd be so. I'm sick of it, and it's twice.
Year
now.
6 or 7, you'd be like, okay, we've done this. What's the uniqueness of going up there and seeing this game? So I think that's sort of where the ODU series falls into right now. It's like, it was like what ECU used to be. Remember how sick everybody got of the ECU series, and then by the time there's like one little hiccup with the Hurricane game, everybody's like, that's it, we're out. Enough of this. We still have to seize the opportunity to get out of that. Now they have basically the same thing with ODU, and it's like, okay, give us something new, something fresh.
For 2 minutes, this is a fun little rabbit hole. And please go ahead, obviously like the show, but then leave in the comments your thoughts on this. Who would you like to see Virginia Tech playing the night? Because I think this Rutgers is fun. Now, do you want to do it every year? No, but back-to-back years with a home and home with Rutgers. I mean, that's a former Big East opponent. That's a fun matchup. West Virginia would be terrific. Now it would make the schedule very, very difficult, but playing Tennessee off once in a while would be
not
fun.
Play that.
Well, that's the problem is you need to have a willing scheduling partner.
Sure.
Tennessee doesn't want to do a home and home with Virginia Tech. Yeah. It never has. I mean, it only sort of got dragged into the Bristol game because of the unique opportunity of that and the payday that was associated with that. So, you have to find schools that are willing to do it. You have to find schools that have a slot in their schedule to do it. I think that's a big reason why they scheduled this ODU series out for 10, 12 years or whatever it was. It's just sort of the comfort of knowing you have spots filled. And then you're not scrambling at the last second. It's like, we need a team to fill this. It ends up being like an FCS team. There's one year, I forget what game got canceled. It might have been the Michigan game or something like that where they had to bring
at the last second.
Yeah, they had to play 2 FCS teams in 2019. And it was like, well, that's not ideal. I think it was 2019. One of those years where they had 2 FCS teams. It's just, it's not fun if you're an athletic director and you have to scramble at the last second because, it's not like the NCAA video game where you go in there and you're like, well, put Alabama on there. Done deal. Like, the other school has a say in this whole thing and how they have to line up their schedules too. So I would love to see Tennessee. Probably not going to happen. West Virginia would probably be a willing partner. Maryland's on the schedule for 4 games here coming up pretty soon. I would love to see Penn State somehow get back.
COVID robbed the fan base.
Oh,
of the
that
Penn
was
State
just so
series.
brutal. It was going to happen until the COVID hit, and it's like, okay.
And now it would mean even more.
Michigan, backed out of that. That would be a fun series to do.
Maybe they'll play Wisconsin.
Wisconsin sometime this century would be great. It's been backed up like 25 years at this point.
They had a series scheduled with Auburn once, right, Will? And it got canceled.
Yep, they did.
Yeah.
That'd be a great series. Those are two kind of, similar schools in that, I think Auburn kind of gets the cow college label in Alabama as well, sort of a school that is similar tendencies between the two programs like that. But I would like a matchup like that. Not just my personal connection to Auburn, having covered that, but I think that'd be a fun one to see.
If you're going group of 5, I'm 2 for 1 with App State. How about that?
Sure.
I've always wanted to go to Boone. I've always heard that was a good town.
Yeah, and they've done series like that with Miami before. I think Miami had to go up there one year. So I don't know if that was a home and home or 2 for 1 or something like that. But there's schools around here that I think would be willing to do it. I think, there's one game in James Madison. I think you could probably do a 2 for 1 or a 3 for 1 with JMU, and they'd probably jump at it. I think they would jump at that. But I think that would be far more interesting to me to go up to JMU once and then have them come here a couple times than to keep going back and forth with ODU.
What about like Texas A&M? That's another kind of comparable school to Tech. The two Power 5 schools, Power 4 at this point, with the core cadets and everything.
They've done that.
They did that once.
I'm not sure you were alive. Yeah, 2002 and 2003.
Okay,
yeah.
Tech won both games.
Well, there was also Jim Weaver was in talks with them to do it again. At some point, it just never materialized. I think that'd be a great series just because, 2 pretty similar schools, like you mentioned, with the core cadets and things like that. The only downside is they both wear maroon. I guess that's sort of a sticking point to just aesthetically watching the game like that. But that first series they did was a good one. And the one that was the game here was the Hurricane Isabel game.
That's right.
So that's a pretty memorable win in Virginia Tech history. And the win down there was a low scoring, it's like 13 to 3 or something like that. So that was a good matchup too. But there are schools out there. I think South Carolina, I know they're playing them next year in the opener. I think that would be an interesting one that they're playing in Atlanta. Hey, get together in Charlotte or something like that. I mean, that's a game that both fan bases would flock to.
Oh, yeah.
I think. So there are matchups out there to go after. I think if you just have more variety with it, I think that would make it more interesting.
UCF is, a Power 4 school now.
Yeah.
Right? So how about an early season matchup with them, and that gives you a nice trip to Florida the year you're in the road game? Yeah.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Will, you said you had something for us in the 4th chair over there.
Yeah, on a related note, since we're talking about play in ODU, somebody put this. Nick, you've got the graphic for the most expensive games ready to go. Yep. Somebody put this on our message board this morning. It's a neat graphic. It's not sourced, and the guy admitted I haven't verified this. So for those who are just listening and can't see the graphic, it's most expensive games in college football. And what this means is the cheapest ticket available. So I assume somebody's looking at StubHub, SeatGeek, and the cheapest ticket available means it's an expensive game to get into. Number 1 is Colorado at Colorado State. The cheapest ticket is $225. And I'm really not happy they're playing that game at the same time Tech is playing ODU, because I love to watch me some Colorado and Colorado State. Game number 2 is Alabama at Wisconsin.
So that's just this week.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Sorry, week 3.
Week 3. Because I was going to say, I was looking up tickets to go to Alabama, Tennessee, because we happen to, on the way down to Vanderbilt, we're like, man, it's right here. It's halfway down 3 hours. Let's go to Alabama. No, that's like over a month's rent for a ticket to Alabama, Tennessee, and Knoxville.
Yeah, I was trying to get all the pertinent information in, but I did leave that part out. This is for this week. All right. So Alabama at Wisconsin is $165. Notre Dame at Purdue, the cheapest ticket is $139. Number 4 is Virginia Tech at ODU. The cheapest ticket is $118. Well, that's a limit of SB Ballard Stadium being just under 22,000 in capacity. So I thought that was interesting to add to the discussion.
Yeah, it should be rocking in there. Some Hokies, definitely going to be a lot of ODU fans in there as well. They made it. You don't want to. It's tough to say a tough place to play because the capacity is small and you're not in a place indoors where it's trapping the noise and stuff like that. But good crowd a couple of years ago. There wasn't an open
mostly
seat.
Tech fans, so it's not a difficult place to play at all.
Sure.
Go in there and win the game.
It's not, but sometimes like those smaller stadiums where it doesn't feel like just like overwhelming when you're in there, when you're on the losing side where things aren't going well, you're like, man, we can't take care of business in this kind of stadium. I think that maybe kind of plays in your, like if you're losing, you're like, oh man, we're having a tough time on the road and it's a 100,000 seat stadium. Like maybe you kind of expect that, like, oh, this is a tough place to play. But if you go in somewhere, you know, you should be able to handle this. It's not that huge of a stadium, not that overwhelming, and still not happening. Maybe that, you know, factors in a little bit.
Do you guys know the answer to this? Is this a spot where they limit the amount of tickets? Now everywhere technically does limit, but like I feel like the narrative a couple of years back when they played there is they limited and were very strict on how many tickets Tech fans could get access to.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes some of these smaller schools will just offer season ticket packages that a Tech fan will look at and be like, well, I'll just buy the season ticket package. And it's not that much more expensive than what the ticket would cost on the open market because the demand is so high.
Yeah.
They could limit it in that sense and be like, well, no, you have to have an ODU email address or something, like verify that you live around here or something like that. But, you know, with StubHub and SeatGeek and all this stuff, I don't know if one is a sponsor. I don't want to, you know, preferences for one side or the other. StubHub. If you're on StubHub, obviously of the two sites, you know, people are going to sell it to whoever wants to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and wrap up our conversation here about the press conference and kind of tie it back to that. Coach Pry talked about drones quite a bit and his performance through 2 weeks. Andy, what were you able to pick up from that?
Yeah, I think they'd like to see him play a little bit more like himself. Maybe he hasn't been quite like himself these first couple weeks. And, you know, there's been periods of time during the game, especially in the second half, where he's looked pretty sharp. You know, second half last week, he was, you know, the ball didn't hit the ground. 5 for 5, 90-some yards, I think, a touchdown pass, had the deep ball to Gosnell. But there's also the first half of that game where looks a little uncomfortable in the pocket, maybe a little gun shy with some of the throws, scrambling to try to get open. I don't know if that's on the receivers for not getting separation down the field or if that's on drones for not seeing them. But there seems to be sort of a disconnect in that situation and maybe doesn't look as comfortable in the pocket throwing the ball as he did at the end of last year. So they'd like to get him, you know, Price says, what is your offensive identity? It's like, it's when the quarterback is playing his best. So whatever they do offensively, and that's, you know, blocking, that's running the ball to create passing situations, they need to do that better so that they're getting the best version of drones when they're out there. Because when he's good, they're a pretty good team.
They've faced zone coverage 81% of the time this year, according to this graphic we have from at football_SIS. Now, if that seems like an unusually high number, it is. It's 29% more than the relative 2022 FBS average. So teams have decided, okay, rather than playing man and giving him less to read, we're going to make him read the whole field the majority of the time and try to confuse him. And I think he has been hesitant, and he's not sure of what he's seeing out there. Instead of doing an Inside the Numbers today, I'm actually doing a video article, and one of the things I'm doing is breaking down the sacks from this past week's game. And generally, I haven't finished it yet, but it's looking like at least half the sacks are coming from either coverage sacks or drones just being hesitant to throw it or throw it away. There's only one of them from this past week that is out and out the offensive line's fault. So I think the offensive line, they're not great, but they're getting a little more flack than they deserve. And yeah, I do think he's seen some things for the first time this year, and he's struggling to process it. But the more he sees it, I'm sure that he'll get better at it.
Can we remind everybody, this man has still not started a full season of college football when you add it all together.
And he was only a 2-year starter in high school, and one of those was the COVID year, and he didn't really get any, so you didn't get any development really that offseason. So he's very inexperienced from a pure passing standpoint.
For sure.
So I drilled down into the numbers in my Monday article, went down the rabbit hole and looked up a lot of stats on drones that feed into what you're talking about. So let me give you 4 stats. from 2023 to 2024, and this is all stuff from PFF. The defensive pressures haven't really changed. In 2023, it was 35.8%. This year, it's 36.9%. So roughly 36% of dropbacks are being pressured by the defense. If you think the offensive line isn't pass blocking well, they're not worse than last year, all right? The sack rate for drones has gone up from 7% last year to almost 11% this year. Interesting. The percentage of pressures turned into sacks has gone way up. Last year it was 19.5%. This year it is 29.2%. Drones is throwing it away less often. 8.4% last year, only 3.7% this year. So if you want to tap the -15 button a couple of times and listen to that again, what it does is it paints a picture of a guy who is being pressured about the same amount, is getting sacked more often, isn't throwing it away as often. All right, so that kind of feeds into that. And QCP, who's a poster on our message boards and is a data guy, he is also going through PFF. And I want to read you a paragraph that he put on our message board this morning. He talks about drones as passing, but then he said the biggest difference from last year is with his running. If you look at PFF rushing data, which excludes sacks, so we're talking about scrambles and runs, the difference is stark. Last year, drones averaged 11 attempts a game, 6.8 yards a carry, 76 yards a game. 11 attempts, 6.8, 76. This year, 12 attempts, 3.2 yards per carry, and only 38 yards a game. So his run, and he doesn't have a single run over 13. His long so far this season is 13 yards. And last season he had something like 9 carries of 15 plus yards. So that's all really interesting stuff. He appears to be holding on to the ball a little bit too long, and when he does run, it's not as successful. And people on the message boards have commented that he's going more to the edges, not up the middle, versus last year. There's no data to back that up. That's just what people think from what their eyes are telling.
Pry addressed drones' running in post practice yesterday. He says, a lot of defenses are forcing him to give the ball up. I mean, a lot of these are read plays where the defense dictates who gets the ball in that situation. And I think after last year, a lot of defenses are looking at this thing and going, this guy's not going to beat us. We're not going to let him run for 100+ yards or something like that. We're going to make him give it up to somebody else. And Pry, basically said, we have to have better options out there when he does give the ball up. And that's why you see Tootin have some success like he did last week, 120 yards rushing through basically 3 quarters. You have to have other options even when they take that away. So I think that's part of the issue with this offense is just, learning how to sort of diversify because they have weapons out there. They have to figure out ways that, when they take away this option on a play or option B, what is option C? What is the safety valve on a play where you can still get yardage even if they go after the things that you want to do?
Yeah, they're making it a point, like you said, like Price said, to keep it out of his hands in the running game. That's the thing about running a lot of option is that the other team, if they're disciplined, they can dictate who gets the ball. And they're definitely making it a point to make sure Drones doesn't run it. Back to the passing game, the other point I want to make is opponents are only blitzing 21% of the time against Virginia Tech. So they're only blitzing 1 out of 5 times, and then 4 out of 5 times they're playing zone coverage. So it's basically like, okay, we're just going to rush 4 guys, and we're going to flood the middle of the field in zone coverage, and good luck reading it when you have never really had to do that before in any year that you've played football. So he's seeing a ton of things for the first time this year. And I do think that's seems like the smart way to play him. And yeah, it's a struggle. So they've got to find their way through that.
I enjoy learning from you guys. I learn more about football every time I sit in this chair. It feels like week in and week out. Andy, anything else in the press conference? I know Pry had touched on the O-line. He had also touched on the linebackers a little bit that's worth noting before we move on.
I think the big takeaway from yesterday post-practice is Bashal Tootin. He's in blue. He took that sort of awkward hit to his left leg at the end of that play. Marshall guy hits him on it was a play action or something like that, fake handoff to him. And Toot did not get the ball, but he did get hit on that play, did not come back into the game after that point. He was in blue, probably put him at about 90%. Says mostly precautionary just to keep the scout team from coming in and touching him or hitting him in any way. And, there's a reason why the quarterbacks wear those orange jerseys at practice all the time. You want to keep your best players their healthiest at practice. So I think it's precautionary. I think he'll play and be fine on Saturday, but just something to keep an eye on.
Awesome. Good to know that Hokies will most likely have Bashal Tootin in the backfield, and it's nothing to worry about. Well, there's some Tidewater connections to this whole thing, and we're going to talk about that. But first, Will's got a little something that he wants to plug.
I tell you what, I do have a thing here I want to read, but I've had so much airtime so far. Go ahead and keep moving the show along, and I'll tap in later.
All right, sounds good. By the way, that was that breakdown, those stats. That's exactly, I think, what long ago you had envisioned the fourth chair chime in to be. So that was pretty cool. The in-depth deep dive there. Well, the Tidewater connections, we talked about a little bit of it, and we'll kind of get a little bit further. A lot of people know about it, but it's definitely worth noting that sometimes there are emotions to this type of game. Brent Pry, and of course, old ODU head coach Ricky Ronnie, previously on the same staff under James Franklin at Penn State. Virginia Tech receiving coach Fontel Mines, and then the strength coach as well, Dwight Galt. They were both hired from ODU. Then, of course, Ollie Jennings, who used to play for the Monarchs after his 1 year at West Virginia, played for ODU. Hokies plucked him out of the portal after 3 years in Norfolk. And then former Tech running back Bryce Duke. He now suits up in the backfield for Old Dominion. He is listed this week as a third-string running back, but has been taking the second-string carries through weeks 1 and 2. So a little bit of connections. There were connections in the Vanderbilt game. There were some connections with Marshall. It feels like every time Virginia Tech plays one of these non-con opponents, there's ties somewhere. And that's just kind of what you get in this region of the country, I guess.
Yeah, the Ollie Jennings one is interesting because, I mean, he played in that game in 2022 and was probably the best player on the field. 5 catches for 122 yards, including a big one late down to like the 1 yard line. I asked Brent Pry about that. It's like, yeah, I remember that play. And I talked to Fontel Mines, like, does Ali ever bring that up? It's like, he's not allowed to mention the 2022 game. That's verboten in the wide receiver room. So, a lot of connections there. APR, from the 757, Daquan Felton, went to Norfolk State. Interestingly, never really drew any interest from ODU. The first time around, Norfolk State was his only offer. So we're asking him this week, any extra motivation. His quote was, "I don't take it personal." And then he said, "I mean, it's their loss." So maybe take it a little personal. It sounds like there's some, some feelings in that answer that he had there. But certainly those guys are scrambling for tickets. We saw the ticket prices for what it's going with. Players get a certain allotment to games like this. It's probably a lot of competition for trying to get those tickets from those guys this week.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, our game info breakdown, Virginia Tech at Old Dominion, 6 p.m. You can watch it on ESPN Plus at SB Ballard Stadium in Norfolk. Virginia Tech currently sits as 14.5-point favorites on the road against ODU. That, unfortunately, has not gone well. Tech is now 0 for 2 against the spread so far this year. Tech leads the all-time series 3-2, and the road team has never won. So that is definitely something to keep an eye out for. Breaking down ODU last season, they finished 6-7, went 5-3 in the Sun Belt, lost in overtime to Western Kentucky in the famous Toastery Bowl, and they ran for 207 yards with 4.7 yards per carry against Virginia Tech last year. Hokies won the football game, but again, it was one of those we walked away, similar to Marshall, I think, where we're like, you just don't feel fantastic about it,
I didn't feel good about it at all. If you look at the Russian disparity in that game, they really out-schemed Tech. They spread Tech out defensively and were able to attack the gaps very well. They had a really good game running the football, and then they shut down Tech's running game. Virginia Tech won the game because, they had 3 touchdown passes, and ODU just didn't have the talent out in space to be able to stop Virginia Tech's passing game. But they won the game not on the scoreboard, but they won it. But ODU won it schematically, and they won it in the trenches. So that was a really big concern last year. And you're sitting there thinking, man, when the Hokies start playing more talented teams, it's going to be a struggle. And then, sure enough, they lost their next 3 games. If you remember last year, ODU had a new offensive coordinator and a new quarterback who had come from Fordham, along with their offensive coordinator. So you didn't know exactly what you were going to get. This year you do know. You know exactly what that offensive coordinator is going to do. You don't know necessarily who's going to be playing quarterback for him this week, and we'll get into that. But it's not a dangerous offense. They haven't scored 20 points in a game this year.
To Chris's point, so far ODU this season is 0-2, losses on the road at South Carolina, who, by the way, is getting College Game Day this weekend against LSU. Yeah, big one.
Surprising.
Very surprising.
I thought, I mean, it's a weak slate of games, but I thought the BC Missouri game was more interesting.
The only top 25 game is BC Missouri.
Yeah, and they make that decision before the poll comes out, but I think you could have guessed that BC would get up into that.
As expected before the season started, Boston College, Missouri would be one of the premier games.
But I mean, Missouri's playing really well. SEC school, BC with Bill O'Brien and stuff. I thought that would be the more flashy game, but no, they went within the SEC on this one.
They picked the wrong Columbia. A lot of people are saying, because it's Columbia, South Carolina, Columbia, Missouri. They picked South Carolina, and really, from I just listened to the College Game Day podcast. They were like locked and loaded, going to go to Georgia, Kentucky. And then Kentucky got absolutely boat raced by South Carolina at home. And they're like, okay, I guess we'll go to South Carolina instead.
What was the week one?
Week one.
It was a Georgia.
Well, that was week 0. In
week 0 was in Dublin. Week 1 was Texas A&M Notre Dame.
Okay. So I thought they might have been a Georgia Clemson. I'm like, why would they see Georgia again? Also, why would you go to Kentucky? That game is not going to be close.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. That's... I guess the result last week steered them in a different direction, but I still think BC Mizzou is the better game, more interesting game to me.
I agree. I enjoy them deciding to they're trying to get to places they don't often get to go to, because Reese Davis said that in his 10 years on the show he's never been to Columbia, South Carolina for game day.
Wow.
So
I'm guessing Shane was probably lobbying pretty hard. He's got friends in the media. He can get the word out there if he really wants to try to push for something like that. I would imagine there was a little bit of lobbying that was going on there.
Well, the reason this all comes up is because ODU played at South Carolina, and they gave them a little bit of a run for their money. Final score 23-19 in that ball game. That was their better performance. They also lost at home to ECU last week, so the Monarchs are 0-2. Final score of that one, 20-14. Played well enough in a lot of ways to beat South Carolina. To Chris's point in his article, not the case against ECU. They were dominated statistically, but ECU threw 4 interceptions that kind of kept ODU in the ball game. Chris?
Yeah, I think they're 0-2. They're 0-2 for a reason, because their offense is absolutely one of the worst in the country. I mean, go through the stats.
Okay, here we go. We're going into the offense by the numbers. Rushing offense, number 107 in the country. Remember, there are 131 FBS teams. Is that correct?
130-ish.
134 this year.
134 this year. All right. Rushing offense, 107. Yards per carry, 119. Passing offense, 94. Yards per attempt, 121. Total offense, 115. And yards per play, 125. They break the top 100 once in passing offense by 6 places.
Right.
So
and their quarterback got hurt on the last play of the game last.
And we don't know if he's going to play or not.
Grant Wilson, I guess Ricky Ronnie has a no injuries policy in his press conferences, which, come on. I mean, I think in the Sun Belt they're going to have to actually put injury reports. Like it's coming eventually that all conferences are going to have these injury reports that they have to respond to. But
you have to in the NFL.
See. Yeah, we'll see if he ends up playing. It sounds like the backup has kind of a similar style, so it wouldn't change too much schematically.
And I will point out that the backup is Colton Joseph, who is a redshirt freshman who's never played a college snap.
Well, I'm surprised that he is the backup, because they also have Emmett Moorhead
from BC,
who started before Castellanos took over up there at BC. I thought he would be the guy, but I guess systems and changing programs like this that factors in.
We know little to nothing about Colton Joseph, to Chris's point, because he's never played a college snap, other than the fact that he had offers from Army, Navy, Air Force, and Old Dominion. So he was like, I guess I'm going to forego the service academy and go to ODU.
Well, what that tells you is he is mobile.
Yes.
And I know everybody's scared already, right? Because he's a mobile quarterback. But yeah, if the service academies offer you as a quarterback, then you have mobility.
Right.
But he's also very inexperienced. Their wide receivers have not been good. Isaiah Page has had a pretty good career there, but Virginia Tech has shut him down in the past whenever they've played. I think last week against East Carolina, they didn't put together a drive longer than 36 yards until the late third quarter. I mean, they could not move the football against East Carolina. So this is an offense that lacks weapons at pretty much every position.
Against the vaunted ECU defense.
Vaunted ECU. Yeah, the run, ECU's run defense was good last year, but still, you know, this is just, I mean, the Marshall offense lacked talent last week, but I think the ODU offense is actually less talented than the Marshall offense.
We know how quickly you can turn things around in the modern era of this sport with the portal and whatnot, but we'll remind everybody, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, ECU won 3 games last year?
They weren't good. I can't remember what the actual record was.
Yeah. This has been ECU between the fancy uniforms and how bad they were last year. It was almost a lot of people's pick when the new video game came out. Like, let's rebuild them. Cool stadium, cool uniforms, but they're terrible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
2-10. Nick says 2-10.
I think you know, Mike Houston, the coach there, he had a pretty good first year. Yeah, especially from where that program was previously. I mean, with Scotty Montgomery, it was pretty bad in the post. What was the previous coach's name? The
guy they never should have fired.
Yeah, and I'm
Ruffin,
blanking.
right?
Ruffin McNeil.
Ruffin McNeil, who was a pretty good coach, hit a rough patch and they got rid of him, and then the program just went in the tank. But yeah, I thought he was okay in his first year, but then they were pretty bad last year. But the fact that they come into ODU and beat them maybe kind of tells you where ODU is right now this year.
I think best case scenario, obviously, for ODU would be having a healthy Grant Wilson play. Remember, you guys mentioned it, last play of the game, what it is labeled as is a wrist injury on that last play of the game. So
non-throwing hand.
Non-throwing hand. Thank you, Andy. He was decent last season, completed 57% of his passes for just over 2,000 yards, 17 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. Again, nothing special here. Rushed for 289 with 4 touchdowns. Now in his second season with offensive coordinator Kevin Decker, but it starts on the ground, and they've struggled to get things going running the football. Against South Carolina, 34 carries for 108 yards, 3.2 yards per carry, and then against East Carolina, 41 carries, less than 100 yards. I mean, 95 yards on the ground, 2.3 yards per carries. You add it up, and they've just eclipsed 200 yards in 2 games with 203 and under 3 yards a carry. They just can't get it going.
They can't get it going. Aaron Young is their starting running back, and he's never rushed for over about 250 yards for any season in his career, and he is a 5th or 6th year guy. 3.6 yards per carry for his career. A pretty big sample size. He's not a game breaker. Bryce Duke leads them in yards per carry for the season so far at 4.1, and
only 11 carries.
Though. Only 11 carries, so it's a smaller sample size. So yeah, I mean, just every stat you can pull up, and then, you know, even if Grant Wilson does play, I don't think they have great talent on the outside. Grant Wilson was, I put his stats against Virginia Tech last year in the article.
Let me pull up the article.
Let's see. Never mind.
Well, I might have it somewhere in here.
I think he threw for less than 100 yards against Virginia Tech last year.
95 yards.
95 yards. And he was, what was his completion?
I'm sorry, I do not have it, but I will search as you continue.
I think it was like 50%. At any rate, just not effective through the air against Virginia Tech last year because he's not a very good passer against a higher level of competition, and they don't have great receivers at Old Dominion. So they don't have great receivers. They don't have a great quarterback. They don't have a great set of running backs. I mean, there's a reason they're outside the top 100 in every conceivable offensive category. It's just that they don't have players on that side of the ball.
Chris the Hater is back.
I'm back.
He's back. Feeding the
Didn't you miss me?
Motivation for the other team here. Also, their offensive line has been pretty leaky.
Yes.
In terms of pass protection. 9 sacks allowed. That's the second most in the country. That is more than Virginia Tech, which is allowed 8, which is 130th nationally. I think you saw that, especially in that South Carolina game, whoever that freshman defensive end they have. That's the highlight of him like bending underneath the tackle and getting to the quarterback. I think if you're APR, if you're Cole Nelson, Keyshawn Burgos, you may be licking your chops a little bit in this one coming into this. There's going to be some opportunities to get the quarterback on the ground.
Yeah, you know, generally if you're a struggling offense and you want to figure out where to go from here, you're like, okay, what are we good at? And let's try to continue to establish that and kind of rebuild the offense around that. It's like halftime in the movie Necessary Roughness, and the coach is like, let's analyze what's been working for us. And he's like, nothing's been working for us. And nothing has been working for Old Dominion literally nothing. So offensively, so I don't know exactly what they're going to do this
Sounds
weekend.
like they need to bring Scott Bakula into the fold.
Probably there is a 38-year-old quarterback somewhere who can help them.
To answer Chris's question, Grant Wilson last year against Tech, 13 for 25, 94 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns and interception. He did lead the team in rushing that day, 19 carries for 81 yards.
Whoa, wait a minute. He got sacked 5 times and he still let him in rushing?
They totally out-schemed Tech in the run game last year.
Yep.
But I don't think...
Wait, Virginia Tech had problems stopping the run early last year?
Right,
I don't
exactly.
recall that being...
Yeah.
Okay. That was
Who knows?
Well, at another point I put in my notes here that we didn't even mention with the running backs is you don't have Keyshawn Wicks this year because he was dicing Virginia Tech up last year too. The numbers don't necessarily blow you away. I mean, he had 14 carries, 73 yards, but he averaged 5.2 yards a carry. He also had a receiving touchdown, 20 yards through the air, but it was more the eye test. It was like they just can't stop that guy.
Right, and 2 years ago, ODU had a really good running back too. I forget his name off the top of my head. So like 2 years ago, ODU, I believe, only went 4-8, or no, they only went 3-9 that year. They beat Virginia Tech.
That's right. Yep.
Who went 3-8. But that ODU team did have Ollie Jennings on the outside, and they had that really good running back who was a 1,000-yard rusher.
And their quarterback was
I don't remember who the
higher esteemed going into the year. Right?
They also had the tight end who ended up having a cup of coffee.
Running back
NFL,
was Blake Watson.
Blake Watson. That's it. Yeah, he was a very good
transferred
player.
somewhere.
So that was a much more talented ODU team than this one.
Yeah.
And even then, like that game, they only had 240 some yards against Virginia Tech, and they didn't win the game till 33 seconds left. And that was all of like 5 Virginia Tech turnovers, snapping the ball over the kicker's head, or the holder's head. I mean, it took a comedy of errors for ODU to win that game. Like, even with the offensive talent that they had, which was much greater than they have now, they still got shut down offensively by Tech defensively in that game. So
Blake Watson, by the way, transferred to Memphis for his final year. 1,000-yard rusher that year with 14 touchdowns.
Excellent
I think he's actually either on the Broncos roster or on the practice squad. He's got a shot in the NFL.
He was one of several players on that ODU team that I wanted Tech to go after in the portal.
Well, that was the thing about that 2022 games. You're like, oh, Virginia Tech should go down there and handle business. Like, I don't know if they were the more talented roster that year. This year, I think they are, and that'll play into the picks that we make later this year. But, you know, from where Tech was in 2022 and when Pry inherited this team and was taken over, it's like, if I just, put the rosters side by side or the starting lineups, I don't think it's going to be a lot of maroon that I'm choosing as the better matchup in those one-on-ones.
Tech, in the 2 years that they've lost to ODU on the road in Norfolk, those ODU teams in 2018 and 2022 have a combined record of 7-17. So they're not great.
They weren't great, but I mean, they did have players. I mean, that 2018 game, those receivers were outstanding. And a couple of them,
they put up 45 points.
A couple of them
49
made it in the NFL,
49,
either on
49.
rosters or practice squads. I mean, the quarterback in that game was Blake LaRussa.
Wasn't he their backup?
Who went into to become like a priest. Like, I don't know if that was like the trade-off was having the game of his life. It's like, you have to go into the seminary here, but you will have the game of your life before you do it. I mean, he was incredible in that. The running back in that game, I thought, was pretty good and went to the NFL. They had some NFL defensive players. I mean, there were some individual players that stood out on that team, even though the overall team product for that season was not great.
Right.
Want to dig just a little bit deeper into their offensive struggles through the air, because where they're struggling on the ground, they're not great passing the football either, like Chris had alluded to. 3 different receivers have caught 10 passes, but 2 of them are averaging under 8 yards per catch. You mentioned Isaiah Page. He's actually kind of a stud. 8 catches for 115 yards and a touchdown against South Carolina in a game that, again, they gave the Gamecocks a fight on the road in week 1. And who knows what South Carolina is after they just blew out an SEC opponent on the road in Kentucky, right? So, but Tech has neutralized him the last 2 seasons, like Chris had mentioned. 2 catches for 17 yards. That's totaling the two games. Right. So, but they got some other guys. I would say for a school like ODU, 9 times out of 10, when you get a receiver transferring in from the Power 4 level, there's a level of excitement. Unless he's coming from Iowa, who's one of the worst offenses in the country. They got one. Deontay Vines is a senior wide receiver transferring in from the University of Iowa. And 32 career catches. Again, part of one of the worst offenses in the
He was a
nation.
backup
last
receiver
year.
on a bad offense.
That's what you said about Northwestern the previous year, though. Coming in from a terrible offense, and then Malik Washington goes to UVA, and he leads the ACC in the country.
Yeah, that's true.
So
True.
sometimes it's bad situations you're getting out of that. Maybe the talent has a chance to blossom.
So far,
else.
he's not doing that, though. 7.6 yards per catch. Yeah.
10 catches, 71 yards. They got Miles Alston. He's a transfer wide receiver, came in from Pitt. He just has 10 career receptions. All of them have come this season. He's caught 10 passes, 78 yards for ODU. Never caught a pass playing for the Pitt Panthers. He's a redshirt junior. Kelby Williams is a guy to look out for. He's a mainstay for ODU at this point. 451 yards a year ago on 26 catches. Chris, the receiving core here for ODU just kind of seems to lack depth, and then they can't really beat you outside either. Like there's not a talent mismatch here.
On the outside, with their outside receivers, Kelby Williams was their big play threat last year, but he's only played something like 10 snaps this year, maybe something like that. It might have been 15, I don't know, but he's hardly seen the field at all this year, even though he's listed technically as a starter. He's barely played, which shows how how much you can rely on some of these depth charts, right? But yeah, they're kind of like Marshall last week. And it's odd to say this considering we had what I thought was the best catch in Lane Stadium history by that Marshall receiver. But, Marshall just didn't have much in terms of wide receiver talent or quarterback talent. And this ODU team is pretty similar.
Yeah, Chris, to flesh that out, last year, 26 catches for 451 yards, and he's only played 7 snaps.
7 snaps this year, yeah.
There you go. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of our platforms. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs. That includes free checking. Visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. All right, Will. Let's send it over to you now. Pressure's on.
So you mentioned our content, our editorial content. So I wanted to share something with you. If you're watching on the YouTube video, this is an actual handwritten note that we got in the mail. And Andy, tell me if you used to get these when you worked for the Roanoke Times.
Yeah, sometimes I would. They were always interesting. Let's put it that way.
Dear Tech Sideline, hello, my name is David Jordan. I just wanted to write and say thank you for all that you do. I listen all the time to the various podcasts that y'all produce. He actually wrote y'all. It truly is a great source for everything Virginia Tech related. As a Hokie alum myself, it's great to find a resource like yours to keep up with the news. Again, thank you for all that you do. Sincerely, David M. Jordan.
We love fan mail.
That is nicer than a lot of the letters I would get. I'll say that.
I tell people all the time, like the first home game against Marshall, and even down in Vanderbilt, people stop me and they're like, man, we thank you for what you do. And I always kind of look at him and go, we get paid to do this, right? No, I'm just kidding. Thank you. The kudos, the paychecks are one thing, but the kudos are pretty awesome too.
I went to Sharky's. I was trying to start my cheeseburger streak again. So I had a cheeseburger before the Marshall game, and that's why Tech won, of course. And so I sat down at Sharky's to have my cheeseburger, and this guy's like, I watch your podcast every week, So yeah, it's definitely good to get positive feedback.
Chris, you work out enough. You don't need to come up with excuses to eat cheeseburgers. Just have a cheeseburger if you want one. You don't need to tie it to football streets.
Yeah. However, this is an opportunity also, and I remember I did this a year or two ago. So David, calling you out, I went and looked you up. We've got a couple David Jordans registered for our website, and they have not, neither one of them's logged in for the last 5 years. Maybe that's this David Jordan, maybe not. David, if all you do is watch the podcast and or listen to the podcast and you don't visit the website and you don't subscribe, you are missing out. This business began as a website in 1996. That is our bread and butter. We've got some incredible subscription content for just $12 a month. We used to do first month free. We don't do that anymore. So what I tell people is subscribe for $12. Check us out the first month. If you don't like it, email me and I'll give you your $12 back. But that email exchange is not going to happen. So this is just a reminder, folks, that if all you do is watch on YouTube or listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, there's just an enormous content website attached to this podcast that you like that is really phenomenal. So that's my chance to make that pitch.
Yeah, so I'm not doing an inside the numbers column today. I'm actually going to do a video breakdown of some stuff from the Marshall game that I've already started on, and stuff that we can't cover on a podcast, right?
Yeah.
Well worth checking out. And if you're a Virginia, here's my opportunity to plug. If you're a Virginia Tech student, you don't even got to worry about the $12 a month because your subscription is free. So there's really no excuse there.
Yeah, the entirety of your time at Virginia Tech, you get a free subscription, and when you graduate, you get 2 years for the price of one.
There you go. There you go. So Virginia Tech students, be sure to subscribe as well. Let's go ahead and talk about this defense, shall we? Because the offense isn't great, the defense isn't great, but it's a little bit better. They do run a 3-3-5 system. That means, for those that don't know, an extra defensive back. They're going to call it a different thing everywhere you go. In my experience, I've heard it be called a rover a lot. But whatever you want to call it, it's an extra defensive back on the field. They're going to play with 3 linebackers, 5 DBs, whether that's a safety or a corner. They're playing with an extra defensive back. A lot of the times you'll see them rush 3 defensive linemen, but they might blitz somebody. It's just an extra DB on the field.
Yeah, they're so creative on their depth chart. They don't even distinguish between corners and safeties. It's just 5 DBs.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
5
Cheetahs.
DBs.
We like to
The
call them
Cheetahs,
around
yeah,
here.
exactly.
Cheetahs. Well, speaking of cheetahs, did you see Derek Jones tackle Mansour Delane after the interception? That was hilarious.
Nice. I wasn't here earlier in the week, and I want to speak on that. Mansour Delane had the worst game of his career against Vanderbilt, and he really responded and had one of the best games of his career this past week. So
It took
props to
that
him.
crazy catch to beat him.
It did, exactly.
And he was lights out. That was the one catch
he was.
allowed.
He was really physical in coverage too. Really liked his play last week.
That was awesome. No doubt about it. Well, Jason Henderson, who Chris had mentioned in his article, is a linebacker that he's probably the best linebacker that you don't know. Covering this team last year, we knew all about him. He finished 2nd in the nation in tackles last season. The year prior to that, heading into last year's season opener, he finished 1st in the country 2 years ago in tackles. He went out with a knee injury in last season's finale against Georgia State. He did not play last week against ECU. Played just 36 snaps against South Carolina in the opener. Clearly not back to 100%. If they're without him, that's a huge loss, because he's a guy that reminds me almost like, you can't compare talent exactly, but just because of the impact that he has of NC State's stud linebacker from a year ago.
He's a very, very good player. Again, he's one of those ODU guys that I was selfishly hoping would, enter the portal, that Virginia Tech could have a chance to get. And I've had a few of those guys like that over the last few years, and he's a very, very good linebacker, but I don't think he's over that knee injury. Now, the thing is, though, they've got his backup is, sorry if I butcher this, it's Koa Neatala.
Neotala, I think. Neotala, yeah.
He's played really well the first 2 weeks of the season. So if Henderson is able to play this week, it'd be interesting to see what they do. Do they put both those guys on the field together, with one of them playing a different position? I don't know. But, Henderson is really good. Their defense is much better than their offense. Their defensive numbers are kind of average, but they've been on the field a lot. Like, they were on the field for, I believe, over 90 snaps last week against East Carolina, and that's generally a problem. You can't play that many snaps. The thing that concerns me about their defense, all right, so we talked earlier about how Virginia Tech is struggling against zone coverages and things like that. Now, with that 3-3-5 defense, ODU can throw some really exotic looks at you. Their alignments and things like that can be difficult to read and beat if you're not an experienced pocket passer sometimes. And we saw that, that's the reason they played South Carolina so tough. That South Carolina quarterback was 10 of 23 and only for maybe 110 yards or something like that. Now, he had a better game the next week against Kentucky, but some of these ODU exotic looks can really confuse a quarterback. And heavy zone looks have confused Kyron Jones so far this year. So this is Old Dominion's chance to stay in the game. And then they had 4 interceptions last week against East Carolina. So they can be a very confusing defense because of their alignments. They're not a very physically talented group, and they're undersized, but they can really mess with an opposing quarterback. And so I think Virginia Tech's going to win this game this week. I don't know by how much. If Jones comes out and has a big game this week, that's a great sign that he's made progress in the passing game and starting to see things better. Because from a complication standpoint, this will be his best greatest challenge so far this year, just by the nature of how they align.
Neotala last week, 18 total tackles, 2 solos, 16 assists. Have you seen this thing online? I think it was Alex Kirshner who brought it up, like the controversy with ODU that they seem to have more assisted tackles at home versus when they're on the road. And you look at Jason Henderson's numbers; he's always leading the nation in tackles, and his assist numbers at home a little bit higher than on the road. Sometimes I think that's at the discretion of the home scorekeeper.
It is.
It is. Be interesting to see how that's scored. I'm not taking away anything. These guys are excellent players on the field and stuff like that. But it was always like, you go back to BC back in the day, and BC would always seem to have a linebacker that had like 170 tackles in the season. It's like, how is he making that many tackles? Is that he really in on every tackle, or is that like a scorekeeping?
I know the guy who would call out the tackles for Virginia Tech when Vince Hall was playing here. One of my best friends, and he straight up told me, "Yeah, I gave him a few." Right?
You're in the vicinity is like just the sheer intimidation of Vince Hall coming up on you. You just go to the ground. It's like, give him half a tackle.
Exactly. But that's taking nothing away from Vince Hall, who I think is the best Mike linebacker in Tech history. But yes, you're right. Some players do get home cooking.
Yeah, I saw a TikTok, and they were like, Old Dominion is getting away with robbery in front of everybody's eyes, because when Henderson led the nation in tackles, he led by like 40 tackles, which was like the gap was ridiculous.
Yeah, it's not even close.
Yeah.
And he is all over the field, and he is a legit, really great player.
It's like being a baseball pitcher. You see some pitchers get those outside corners calls, but you have to prove that you're a good pitcher before you get those calls.
It's a Greg Maddux thing, where it's like you're going to give him the edge of the plate there, and sometimes a couple extra inches when it was the 90s and the Braves pitchers were out there.
There you go. What you got, Will?
So since we're talking about tackling, let's dabble in a little bit of Virginia Tech trivia and see if you guys know this one. Let's start with the most tackles in a season. Do you guys know who holds that record at Virginia Tech?
Was it that defensive tackle in the 80s, Scott Hill?
That guy had some crazy numbers back then.
Yep. Scott Hill, 1987, 177 tackles from the defensive tackle position.
Now, that was the wide tackle 6 defense. When you played 6 defensive linemen, 2 linebackers, and 3 defensive
I'm going to guess there's some home cooking on those stats. I don't see a defensive tackle making that many legitimate tackles in the season. I don't know if we have film.
We pass the ball too much now.
No, a defensive tackle back then was basically more like what a defensive end is now. And in that system, you had defensive guards. That's what a wide tackle 6 is. That's the defense I played freshman year of high school. We ran a wide tackle 6.
No kidding.
Yep, that's how old I am.
Who, same guy, not Scott Hill. I don't mean to say it that way, but there is the person who holds the record for tackles in a game and tackles in a career is the same guy. Who is that?
Tackles in a game, I'm going to go Tremaine Edmonds.
1970s.
That was 70s. Rick Rosano.
Rick Rosano. 634 career tackles. Made 30 in a game. Now listen to this. At Kentucky.
Okay.
At Kentucky.
Fair
so
enough.
unless Tech was keeping their own stats, there was no home cooking there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Got any more? That's it?
That's it.
How many times did Kentucky run the ball? And do they have the ball 45 minutes in the game? Goodness.
Yeah, that is wild right there. Well, to piggyback on Chris's notion earlier a little bit here, in rushing defense, they're 104 in the country. Yards per carry, 55 in the country. Passing defense, 72nd in the nation. Yards per attempt, 77th. Total defense, 92nd. Yards per play, 49th. The total yardage numbers, like Chris mentioned, they're poor, but it's mostly because opponents have run 21 more plays through the first 2 games than they have on offense.
Yeah, they've been pretty good as far as yards per play given up. They've just been on the field a little bit too much, partially due to their own offense. I do think it's a team that's undersized. So there are 5 defensive backs in the game. Amazingly, 4 of them are listed at exactly 185 pounds, and another one's 175. There are 3 starting linebackers, 220, 225, 221, and up front they go 260, 280, 262. They are a smallish defense, but they confuse you. They confuse you with their 3-3-5 scheme, and they got guys running everywhere.
They're quick,
in zone coverage and things like that. So. Run the dang ball.
Yeah,
man.
I mean, I think that shows up in the turnover numbers. Yeah. They're tied for 10th nationally. 5 turnovers forced. I think they've gotten some at some opportune times in terms of keeping teams out of the end zone there. And then, that's something that, ebbs and flows from week to week. You're not always going to get turnover numbers like that. And I think you look at that last matchup, Tech had down an ODU, 4 interceptions. I mean, those weren't all on Grant Wells. That last one that, dump off to Jalen Holston gets knocked up into the air, and then that leads to a pick that ODU comes down and wins the game with the touchdown there. If you can avoid those situations, that would be preferable. And one way to do that is not throw the ball as much as you have the first couple weeks. If you can go out there and run the dang ball, there it is. There's that saying again. If they can do that well against this defense, I think you can control the game.
The one thing, now I don't know how much it really favors Tech, because Tech is not terrific in this category offensively by any stretch of the imagination. But the one thing ODU does definitely struggle with is giving up the big play. So far this season, they've allowed 10 plays of 20-plus yards, which ranks 100th nationally. The Monarchs, 27 plays of 10 or more yards allowed. That ranks 82nd in the country. But again, Tech doesn't necessarily dial it up, take the risks down the field to have those big plays. I guess Gosnell, Ali had the one on the road at Vanderbilt, but other than that, they don't take many shots with this offense.
They haven't. They've taken, I think Drones has attempted 5 passes this year that have traveled 20-plus yards. And he's 4 or 5, which is good.
Yeah.
That's a really good.
Especially after last year where that was
9 of 42.
not a strength necessarily.
Exactly. So that's part of the game has improved now. It's a fact. It's a matter of, can you get to a point where you can do it more often, or he can recognize things downfield a little more often than he's doing right now. So hopefully that starts this week. But they are a difficult offense a difficult defense to attack through the air. And seeing what they did to the South Carolina quarterback in week 1 is a little bit concerning. When you know that Drones has had some struggles with some similar things. So it'll be interesting to see how Tech attacks in the passing game. The ideal scenario for this game is you bludgeon them on the ground, and then his passing attempts are somewhere between 15 and 20. Yeah. And you're throwing off short yardage situations after you've established the run.
Right. I think that's the key there is you establish the run, then you throw off play action after that. And when they have to worry about that, and, that long pass to Ollie Jennings against Vanderbilt was set up by a lot of those, I know people like so many first half screens and stuff like that, but Drones does that little hitch fake on a short pass and everybody comes up and bites, and then Ollie's running 40 yards behind the defense untouched. That stuff sets up those kind of plays, and if you run the ball effectively, all of a sudden the defenders have to come up, play the run, then you go over the top on them. So I think it's hand in hand. That's how the offense has to work.
Anything in the special teams stand out to you? For me, Isaiah Page, a veteran returner, he's their best wideout as well, just not against Virginia Tech. 38 career returns, nothing crazy. He's never scored a touchdown, averages 8.5 yards a return. Field goal kicker, 26 of 36 in his career. That's Ethan Sanchez. Nothing crazy. Bryce Duke's probably going to return some kicks, so that's something to look out for. Other than that, anything?
Yeah, I would advise them not to snap the ball over the holder's head.
That'd be good.
That would be not have that sort of Keystone Cops situation like it was last time they were down there. I mean, that was the difference in the game. Yeah. You talk about a 3-point game like that. That was a 10-point swing on that play where they're set up to kick a field goal. Probably make it. Will Ross, I think, was the kicker at the time. He was pretty hot early in the season in that game, but you turn it into a touchdown the other way. That's one of those momentum turning moments in a game. So for a little bit of analysis before we wrap things up, where can the Hokies exploit ODU on Saturday? Where is Tech's biggest strengths against their softest weaknesses?
I definitely think Tech's defense against ODU's offense, just the general matchup. I think they're going to have a great opportunity to just completely shut them down, create shorter fields for the Virginia Tech offense. And even if the Tech offense struggles in the first half, like it has the first couple weeks, you can reasonably expect Virginia Tech to still be ahead, just because the ODU offense has not been able to do anything over the next 2 weeks. So that's the biggest thing. And then I think you've got to run the ball against that smallish defense. But Tech struggled to run against them last year, but that was before the scheme tweaks. So to me, that's it. And if you put the shoe on the other foot, I think if you're ODU, you're like, if we can stop their running game, and that feeds right into our strengths, then we've got Drones throwing it into a blanket zone coverage, which he struggled to read so far this year.
Yeah, I think if you're Virginia Tech, you just avoid some of the classic pitfalls. Take the stairs instead of the elevator, going up to the press box at halftime. Maybe keep a lock on the locker room at halftime. If you're bringing your tugboat chain, like maybe don't bring the real one, bring the fake one that's down there. Like if somebody's getting this tugboat chain, it's not being my diamond encrusted one. It's being the knockoff one that they're taking with. So just some smart things they can do ahead of this game. Something weird's going to happen in this game. It always happens down there, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to what strange thing is going to happen on this trip to Norfolk.
I'll say this: if I'm ODU, I start Bryce Duke in this game. Okay, yeah. So you're
just to mess with him.
Well, not just to mess with him, but like Aaron Young has had a whole career to prove that he's a good running back, and he hasn't done it. And
Bryce Duke's gonna have a chip,
and Bryce Duke's gonna have something to prove. So I can't see any harm in it. That's the direction I would go if I were them.
All right, definitely interesting. If Tech, because Brent Pry is 1-8 as the head coach of the Hokies in one-score games. If Tech were to let ODU hang around, what did they do wrong?
That's they probably had turnovers against that zone defense. They probably had turnovers and gave ODU short fields. And if it's a one-score game, it would probably be something like 17-14 or something like that. I couldn't see this one getting up into the mid to high 20s or 30s or anything like that.
Or a slow start. Mm-hmm. We've seen it for 2 weeks. And, how do you give an underdog belief that they can hang in a game? Let them hang around for a while. And, you get to halftime, you're like in it, then it's like, okay, this isn't a 60-minute game. This is a 30-minute game. And if you only have to go out there and outplay somebody for 30 minutes, a lot of teams can do that, even if they're not as good as the other side. So if they can come out, squash them early, I think that's a big deal in this game, and that's why fast start would be one of my 3 keys if I were doing this thing.
Shall we go ahead and predict this thing, gentlemen?
Sure.
All right, let's start with Will in the 4th chair.
So let's see. My prediction is 31-13 Hokies over Old Dominion. I think Virginia Tech needs to exploit the run game, particularly drones. If you look back at last year, they figured things out after drones had started a couple of games. It's time to figure it out this year because you need to win this one. You need to really get yourself ready for Rutgers. Rutgers is going to be a challenge. So the level of play for Virginia Tech needs to go up. I cannot, even though I got the Kool-Aid here on set, I can't see Tech scoring over 40 yet. I won't believe that till I actually see it. So I'm going 31-13 Hokies, and David is similar score, 31-20. David, by the way, is the only staffer to pick ODU to score more than 13 points.
Yeah, I had Virginia Tech 30-13. I'm kind of in the same spot. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment in this matchup. They've not performed well in Norfolk the last 2 times they've gone down there, and I guess I'm willing to have egg on my face on this one if they don't do it again. Here's a stat I saw on the Action Network, kind of looking up some of these lines things. Virginia Tech's 0-2 against the spread so far this year. 2-touchdown favorite in this game. Teams to lose against the spread in their first 2 games and lay double digits in that 3rd game win 90% of the time straight up and are 57% against the spread since 1990. So you look at some of the trends. Teams that are heavy favorites eventually kind of get going with the season, and 57% against the spread. People might not look at that and go, "That's not that big of a number." It is a big deal in the betting world to have that kind of advantage. So I think the Hokies get right this week. I think they beat them, and I have them winning by 17 and covering.
I've got it 27-13 Tech. I think Tech has a clear talent and clear depth advantage in this game, and for the most part, the matchups heavily favor Tech, but the one thing that concerns me is ODU's strength on defense aligns with what has thus far been Virginia Tech's weakness offensively, which is an inefficient passing game. And I think that will keep ODU in it. I think that has the potential to keep ODU in it. You got to kick on at some point, so hopefully they figure things out this week or right after this week, because Rutgers is going to be a big step up in competition, a really well-coached team, and Miami's going to be a very talented team. So it's time to start pushing on because we're about to start hitting the meat of the schedule. Yeah,
a couple of really big games coming up. The fans for this Virginia Tech ODU matchup have the Hokies winning by 11 or more. 64% of our voters voted that. Hokies winning by 1 through 10, 26%. The Monarchs to win by 1 through 10, 8%. And then ODU to win by 11 or more in a blowout, 2%. Will, what you got?
Gio, we left out Nick. Nick picks the Hokies 27.
I got Knicks.
Did you get it?
Yeah, but if you want to read it, go ahead.
Well, Nick predicts Virginia Tech 27, Old Dominion 10. And I'm not going to read you his whole 4 or 5 paragraphs, but I do like this one. As Ted Logan once famously said in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, strange things are afoot at the Circle K. So Nick thinks some things are going to go sideways, but Hokies still win.
That movie was out before you were born, Nick. You're quoting a movie that, wow. I'm impressed that you understand the classics like that. That is classics. That's like my growing up type movie there, and you're quoting it. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
There you go. I have Virginia Tech. I think I picked Virginia Tech to score the most points of any of us to make a prediction, but very similar prediction. Virginia Tech winning at 34-13, but it's, for me, I think it's a feel-good 34-13. Reluctant to say that, but I think the reason you feel good about it is because they're not going to drop 40 because they're going to run the ball. What do you do when you run the ball? You run the clock. You shorten the game. You're not going to have enough time to drop 40 points on them. But Virginia Tech's going to feel comfortable in the 34-13 win. I think this is the week that, now week 3, the offense starts to gel a little bit more. We start to see it, and this might be the first time. Obviously, you didn't feel great week 1. You were all right after week 2. Tech fans walk away being like, okay, all right, like this is more what we expected. I just feel like week 3, it's kind of a get right type of game. We'll see if that's how it pans out, but I got them 34-13.
It's either that or major panic. Those are the 2 options.
Yeah.
There's not really, if they win by 6 or something like that, I don't think anybody's going to feel all too great.
I'll take one positive out of that if that happens. They won a close game.
That's
There
true.
you go.
Because you do have to learn how to do that at some point.
And they'd be 2-9 at that point in one possession games under Coach Pry. I got a text during the first half, towards the tail end of the first half of the Marshall game, and someone said to me, "Is it time to have a really uncomfortable conversation about Kyron drones?" I was like, "We're already doing this again. Come on!" I'm like, "It's week 2. I mean, no, I don't feel great, but it's that conversation is nonsense." So, what's coming up editorial wise this week? I know it's typically business as usual, but some mix up.
I'm going to break some stuff down on film, show some ways where, Virginia Tech played well defensively against Marshall, but there were also some issues where a more talented team could have exploited the Hokies. And also, in that article, I'm going to break down the 4 sacks that Virginia Tech allowed that game and why they happened.
I've got a mailbag this week. Should put that up shortly after we record this podcast, and then some of the 757 guys going back down there to play. Ollie Jennings too, former ODU player, not from the 757, but played down there.
Sweet. Anything from you, Will?
Yeah, if you can't get enough audio content, Andy's doing Big Dog Sports Talk on Thursday morning. I do it on Friday morning. Andy does it for a half hour, I think. I do it for an hour on Friday mornings, and we're running that through the website this year. So if you just can't get enough, there's another hour and a half you can get.
And then Chris,
now with 60% less coughing this week, so that's progress.
It's
progress
really
on that
Andy's
front.
Turning the corner.
Yeah, and the big dog had like strep throat and the flu, so
man.
I gave it to him through the power of radio. I guess I don't know how that works.
I noticed. I think that is it. No cough drops today. Or we
No,
still
I
have-
have a couple.
Okay, he does have
Still
a
just
couple.
like lingering, especially
Sure.
when I talk a lot. That's when the
Yeah.
kind of a downside of doing a podcast, I guess.
And then as far as video content goes, Carter's been doing a great job with the press conference breakdowns. That just dropped. If you haven't checked it out,
Buy or sell.
check that out. Buy or sell. We're going to record that right after the podcast. Check that out on Friday. And then, Chris, are you doing with Kyle a Friday Q&A? Is that?
Yeah,
is
that's
that
the plan. In fact,
sweet?
I need to go in there and put my thread on the board. Thanks for the reminder.
Yeah,
problem.
that's a pretty cool new piece of video content we do. Chris does a Friday Q&A article, so he gets a bunch of questions from the message board, and he takes some of those, and we're now doing those on video.
That's awesome. I like that. So definitely be sure to check that out. Again, we're throwing more coverage at this football season than arguably ever before. I think it's fair to say with the hands on deck, especially audio video wise. So be sure to check it out. That wraps things up for episode 374 of the Tech Sideline podcast. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company. For Nick Brown, for Will Stewart, for Andy Bitter, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long, and we'll see you next week.